coaches, and
I mean, Singer doesn't he do leadership development with
singing? Yeah,
singing.
Yeah, SENGE.
Yes, doesn't he do? Doesn't
exactly. So he's bringing that to organizations and businesses and schools now too. And similarly, Otto Scharmer.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but each of us have found our way into that, you know, in our own special routes. But now it's, you know, now we don't feel so isolated. We realize that this is the next movement.
Yes.
And this is the emergent change that we want and that we are part of. And so even when things look bleak, we have that sense that we're creating the future.
And what do the light that we bring, right? And welcome to a reasonably spontaneous conversation. I'm here with Patricia Wilson, my friend. And Patricia you are a professor at the University of Texas in architecture and sustainable, and you have written a new book, The Heart of Community Engagement. And I tell you, Patricia, I keep reading it, and then I'll reread the chapter, and then I'll reread the chapter, and I'm absolutely captivated by this. So that's where we are, and I want to continue talking about this process of the evolution of your consciousness and what we're doing. We can impact the world at so much of a greater degree than we ever realized that was possible, is what I'm...
Well, and part of the stories in that book are the stories of my own evolution of consciousness, as well as the stories of these wonderful people that I've followed and learned from as they reflect on themselves and their purpose in engaging communities for social change. And and I had my quest there for finding the perfect program for social change, or the perfect set of services for social change. And you know, the more I kept looking at different possibilities, the more I realized, hey, there's 3 fingers pointing back at me. And the more I got to know the people whose stories I include in this book, the more I realized they knew it was an inside job. They knew that their presence was a major influence on their ability to foster positive change. And their learning process then became my learning process, and I just felt the absolute need to share their stories in this book, because the underlying messages are valuable for all of us, invaluable. We cannot let them go, and now is the time for them to be heard.
I see that because now in the age of the internet, we can take a story and we can amplify it so that it can be heard around the world. These lessons, these core lessons of how do we become engaged? Because I mean, I look at the currently at our situation where we're attempting to build a wall between us and Central and South America. Yeah. There is something so I don't know, 19th century and before about this concept, as if this was what was going to solve what was the underlying processes. Like I could take if I had some kind of a gaping wound, and all I did was just put a Band-Aid on it, or put a bandage.
Yeah, building a wall around a problem is not the way to address it, because everything is interconnected. And so when we make an intervention that doesn't recognize the repercussions and doesn't see the whole system as a whole that's involved, we can make some really bad mistakes. The good side of that is we can learn from those mistakes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There is something about, and I think about this as what an opportunity this is to make investment in learning what we can learn from the situations that are there from Venezuela, from Peru and Brazil, and all the. There's something very emergent there. I'm not sure that the distance between where the problem is and where we're beginning to see the solution is as large as we might think it would be from a very affluent position.
Well, and actually, we've been learning the complexity of cause and effect over the last few decades as we've become aware of the environmental consequences of our decisions, and now when things get polarized more than usual, we are going to get some very quick lessons.
Exactly.
And yet, at the same time, there is a consciousness that is more than emergent. It's really growing. It's out there that problems cannot be treated in a simplistic cause-effect kind of way, and that connection is something that is not just a cognitive understanding, that we're really getting to see that it's not just taking the cognitive knowing deeper, it is some other kind of knowing that is opening the door to address these complex issues. And that other kind of knowing has many different terms. Some call it spiritual awareness, some call it presencing. It is a kind of holistic awareness of our connectedness that changes the way we look at problems and solutions.
And you have actually, that's what I love about the science behind your book, is that you have really gone into the science. There is nothing airy-fairy about your book. You are a scientist, and you have studied this, and you have taken, and you have gone in, and you've worked about it, and it takes my breath away. At the depth of the science that you have had to, that you have gone into to create this piece.
Yeah, and science itself is changing its meaning. It used to be a very empirical, data-driven, which is wonderful, but misses a lot of connections. And so to use story as a format for conveying information allows me, the writer, to connect the visible and the invisible, the qualitative and the quantitative, and this holistic vision is how we learn.
I think about the what it is that we are as human beings connected to story. What is it about the evolution? You know, however we moved into whatever sentience might have been. You know, however that got into to where we began getting our this movement and this evolution of growing our intellectual consciousness. I am sure that this is not the end. To say that this was the ragged end of however we were growing into our next, which to me would be
We're at the beginning, Dennis. We're at the beginning of a whole new phase, and it is a very exciting time to be here doing that now, to be a part of that growing awareness that is really addressing our consciousness, both individual and collective. And that's what I learned from the protagonists in these stories, that they weren't just after the perfect program. They wanted to see the root causes of issues, and it caused them each time to reflect on their own preconceptions, and that is the big shift in this postmodern form of understanding, that it's not dividing the things into small parts, it's seeing wholes, and that means looking at ourself too. Yeah.
That's the thing that I find that as I'm reading the book, you talk about how each time one of the practitioners or one of the people that is in there has to look at themselves and look at their unconscious biases and look at what they brought into and the things that they had no idea that they knew or in order to be able to affect a change. And then suddenly you go, I mean, there's a number of times in the book where you come up and you go, wow, what I brought into that was completely, I had no idea now I'm having to have this shift in consciousness. We actually get to see the shifts in your consciousness as you continue to grow during that process.
Well, of course, it's the first story, for example, in El Salvador after the Civil War. I was starting out in a very conflicted surroundings and trying to find what was mine to do in this. I had an opportunity to say something, and I wanted to figure out what is mine to do. And that is a theme that goes through all the stories. How do we find that greater purpose?
I say that to myself over and over again. When I'm when I work as a communication coach, and I think, what is mine to do? And it completely changes. It completely changes their experience and my experience and everything when I will focus on that, as opposed to trying to think of that I have some type of a manipulative, I can control all the outcomes.
Right.
That's not.
Yeah, right. Because when you make that step, you've changed the perspective from me, myself, and I, and how will I be perceived? What am I known for? What do I need to tell them? What do I need to fix for them? To listening to what is emerging and possible, and in the case of El Salvador, in the sadness from the and grief from the years of internal war, it was the building bridges of understanding between left and right, between urban and rural. I mean, fundamentally people wanted peace, not being right. They wanted peace. And so how do you build those bridges? Yeah.
We can do that here in the United States. I believe that it is possible. That's the thing that I feel so hopeful about in reading your book, is that I can say, wait a minute, there are lessons here that we can take in every culture. I mean, it's just wonderful.
Well, if you consider that that Nancy Dominguez in the middle of the Cauca Valley in Colombia during the drug wars, the cartel wars,
yes,
and the guerrilla armies, was able to find a way of creating possibility among the campesinos, the rural farmers, who considered their future totally bleak. How to create a space for people to discover their own sense of possibility.
You know, another theme that I keep hearing and that I keep reading in your book is the need to be heard. That there is something so healing and empowering when people actually feel listened to.
Yeah.
And that I see is very much in our culture today, that we feel like we're being shouted at as opposed to listened to.
Right. It's those basic communication skills. And it's not a technique. It's a will. It's a willingness.
Thank you.
A desire to know the other, and that takes a huge shift. And a sense of knowing that I am not separate from the other, that we are in this together and
yes,
we affect each other. That is a shift in consciousness that is key to the listening, to the dialogue, and there's one other very big key that goes with that, and that is the heart. And that is the sense of caring. And in story after story, there was always somebody in the community who learned to care about the well-being of others in the community. And that was a transformational moment for people when they got to that. And it's a transformational moment for each of us when we care.
Exactly. And it stuns me to know, and what's your sense of that it feels like that when the internet happened, is that it was an artificial way of, like with crutches, of showing us how our consciousnesses are connected. And it seems like that because now you can get a story from El Salvador, from that, you can get a story there to the world so much faster and so much quicker that we've actually let something loose, something very powerful that we can do. And like anything, we have to deal with it, because it's not, it's like electricity can kill or power the lights.
Right. Everything has its shadow side, and the internet was and still is such a potent possibility for connection and caring.
Yes.
It's our own consciousness that determines how we use it. So the challenge is ours to use the technology and the connectedness, the electronic connectedness that we have, for the heart connectedness as well, and to bring visibility to the efforts going on around the world that are focused on this, to know that we're not alone, that all of these wonderful innovations are happening around the world towards a similar end of caring and connectedness, of livability within the means of our planet, of caring for the planet as well as each other. And so there are so many signs now of efforts to connect up these initiatives around the world so we can really feel that global connection, that there is light there making change, and we can be a part of that. We are a part of that.
That's what makes me so hopeful. Now, I admit I'm wired optimistic. I do. I wake up in the morning at a place. This is my set point in different. However, I look into the faces of these children. As I walk, I go into a store and I look at the faces that they're sitting in and I go, yeah, there is something so wonderful that we have let loose. Their senses of what is possible, their ideas, they're being exposed. You look at television today, Patricia, and every single commercial is set in this beautiful art, because the framing of it and the color choices and all, people are being exposed to levels of art, and they're being exposed to faces, so that we're learning to grow and to express. There's just so much.
Well, and this is a type of learning that really transcends the scientific revolution, because it is an experiential learning.
Yes.
It is a non-cognitive learning. The art and the awareness of relationship and appreciation are fundamental to our global survival and thrival.
Yes.
And technology again makes that possible to enhance.
Do you feel that, because we're hearing and the studies that are saying is that we're at the precipice of our planet on whether or not we can actually survive, or whatever however that's going to come about. And I've always been, again, as an optimist, because science will come to the rescue and we'll figure out some way past this, and I don't know. Anyhow, so what's your sense of this? What's your sense of where we are and how we can go forward? Can you give me some perspective from you as a sustainable scientist?
Yeah. It's easy for the doom and gloom to create more stories, to create more doom and gloom and a sense of pessimism. And that can get expressed as negativity. Now, what I see ourselves being called to in this moment is to look for, is to practice the positive, and to be able to listen to any point of view, to find what's underneath that point of view. That is where the connection comes from. And as each of us defines for ourselves what is ours to do, there are many ways of answering that question. And so for me personally, what I feel is mine to do is to shed light on that growing awareness or consciousness of our interconnectedness, and what it means for deciding what we do for that interconnected whole. What is going to be my offering?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you see that every day. Now, in taking the book, so now you completed this book. What did you learn about yourself in writing this book and putting it together? Because what I feel very strongly is that it's already taking on a life of its own. That you sit there and go, wow, that.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little about that, please? About the part of community engagement.
In writing that book, I learned how much I still haven't learned, because to live up to all the lessons in that book is still a lifelong endeavor. I am still on that journey. And yet also at the same time, a book is kind of an entity with its own life. And that book is attracting attention, opening doors, connecting me with change makers in the field of social change, innovation processes, who are working in many different arenas, whether it's the business organizations or nonprofits or communities, and also with the scientific side of consciousness studies. Those doors are opening. There are so many exciting things unfolding. Just one I'll toss out here is a concerted effort to explore generative fields.
Wow.
Now,
tell me more
yes.
about generative fields.
So, in what I learned from the protagonists in the stories in the book is their awareness of their membership in a larger field. Whatever community they're working with, or community of communities, or even within their own organizations, they can sense a field.
So like a magnetic field, there's a field around, and what we were talking about earlier, about all of us have come into a room, and we have either felt pushing down or an upliftment, or there's been something in that field sense of that all of us have experienced that.
Yes, you can walk into a place and feel a lively field, a sad field, a negative field, a field of self-concern, or a field of love. You can feel those things. How can you take that idea or that awareness of field and use it in a collaborative setting to create generativity, to create new ideas coming out of there. And so that is the idea of how to spark or lift a field to become generative. And
Yes.
and that is, we see this popping up in different ways already. The idea of user-oriented design, a very popular phrase now, is a step towards this idea of generative fields, and that's an infant step towards that. So we can go much further, and researchers are now looking at how do we foster a generative field. So that is so exciting. That phrase was not even on the agenda 20 years ago, and now it's being honed in on to and explored with in many different disciplines.
Exactly. Across, but we had to have permission to even to explore it.
Yeah.
I was studying some about artificial intelligence and the field of emotional artificial intelligence, and it was women who had discovered that this would be important, that you would be able to put this in there, but they were afraid to bring the subject up because they were afraid that they would just be pushed to the side to bring. But now now finally the research is being done into it, and so I see this in the same way, is that we're being able to be and willing to talk about it now, and now researchers are going into it, and so we're getting a chance to explore it.
Well, and you're getting at a very interesting issue here, and that is the feminine and masculine faces of this consciousness.
Exactly.
And so, because this consciousness is very relational, and because it's not just cognitive, but something deeper than that, it aligns very deeply with the feminine approach to knowing and doing, and
Yes.
And we're seeing that is transcending gender per se. It's part of a complete development of the human being.
One of the things because I've always identified myself, I've always identified with my feminine side more than I've identified with my masculine side, even though my physicality, my gender is male. I've always felt my personality, I've always cleaved closer to and had hard, as a matter of fact, I'm learning to be more comfortable around men and be closer to men than I have been to women over the course. So it's an extraordinary healing that is happening within me, and I see it, and I want to bring that up and have that as a part, because I see that as a part of our healing as a planet, and I mean as a species.
Well, and that word healing is so appropriate here because it's related to the concept of wholeness. And wherever there is a divide, whether it's the feminine, masculine, or whether it's the difference between doing and being, whatever that divide is that separates us, that is where we need to work. And I would say one of the main messages from the protagonists in my stories is the need to overcome the divide between doing and being. Because without the being, the doing becomes ineffective.